So my name is Doug Sully. I am the owner and lead consultant with Sully Safety Services based in Mississauga, Ontario. We will work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, helping them achieve compliance with the health and safety laws, which, as we all know, are changing all the time. And we have Ray Snow with us, president of OHSA Safety Training and Equipment. Ray, if you want to give a brief little blurb there.
No problem. So exactly what our company name says, we are a health and safety company where we offer health and safety training, products and consultation, and Sully Safety Services is our partner in the consultation services part of it. So yeah, anything from AEDs to first aid kits and supplies we offer. And safety training goes from anything from first aid, working at heights, and joint health and safety committee training. So anything that you really need at the workplace.
Great. Again, thank you for attending. We're going to get right into this. And again, if you have any questions for those of you just joining, please put them into the chat and we will try to address as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to talk about what employers need to know about the health and safety laws in Ontario. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. So we're going to talk about the Health and Safety Act. We'll talk about workplace responsibilities, the Ministry of Labor, and also what employers need to do in order to be compliant. So let's start with the Health and Safety Act. The Health and Safety Act is a set of laws detailing the duties and responsibilities of employers, supervisors, and workers. The point of the Health and Safety Act is to ensure workers return home at the end of each day safely. The Act puts an onus on the employer to protect workers. This is what's known as the due diligence clause. And everyone is required to work within and follow the law and applicable legislation and regulations. You also have more specific regulations. These contain more detailed requirements to make the workplace safe in specific situations. Some of the examples that may apply to your workplace include the Regulation 860, which is WHMIS, Regulation 851, which is your industrial establishments, Regulation 21391, which is construction projects, Regulation 834 is the definition of a critical injury, Regulation 41405 are farming operations, Regulation 29713 is your occupational health and safety awareness and training, and finally, the Regulation 1101 is your first aid requirements. So these are some of the regulations that apply to your workplace, but they may not be all. In regards to workplace responsibilities, the Act sets out the roles and responsibilities of all workplace parties. The internal responsibility system is the fundamental idea behind the Act. Everyone works together to keep the workplace safe. The workplace is required to solve all health and safety problems. What they want is they want every single workplace party to work together. The idea is the employer, supervisor, employees, as well as your committees and health and safety reps all have a role to keep the workplace safe. Employer responsibilities. Employers have the most responsibility. They do have the most authority and they plan and control all the work. As a result, they do have the most responsibility. They must make sure they review at least annually the workplace health and safety policy, provide specific information and instruction on how to stay safe on the job, ensure measures and procedures identified are carried out in the workplace, ensure the equipment, materials, and protective devices are provided and maintained in good condition, as well as ensure that they're used properly. They must conduct regular risk and hazard assessments and establish control measures based on the results of those assessments. And they must establish and deliver training and education to all employees on how to be safe. They must also look at integrating safe behavior into day-to-day operations and review all reports of accidents and hazards in a prompt, objective, and sensitive manner. They must take appropriate corrective action and provide appropriate response measures. They must facilitate medical attention and appropriate support, and always ensure that any critical injury or fatality is reported immediately to the Ministry of Labor, Training, and Skills Development as well as their health and safety rep and committee within 48 hours after the occurrence. The Act defines a supervisor as a person who has charge of a workplace or authority over a worker. Supervisor and managers also have responsibilities. Supervisors must enforce the policy and procedures and monitor compliance. They must make sure all employees work in a safe manner, ensure employees use protective devices, and follow the measures and procedures required. They must identify and alert staff to hazards in the workplace, investigate all workplace accidents, and facilitate medical attention for employees as required. They must also immediately report critical injuries to a Ministry of Labor inspector, immediately report critical injuries to the health and safety rep, joint health and safety committee, and senior management or the employer. They must send accident reports within 48 hours after the occurrence to the Ministry of Labor director. They must also report any lost time, healthcare, or modified pay accidents to the employer as well as WSIB. And your WSIB requirements are within 3 days of the accident occurring. And you must also provide non-critical injury accidents and reports to your health and safety rep or committee within 4 days of the event occurring. Employees, they also have responsibilities. Employees must make sure that they participate in education and training programs. They must understand and comply with the workplace health and safety policy and all related procedures. They must report all accidents and injuries and/or workplace hazards to their supervisor immediately. They must inform the health and safety rep about any health and safety concerns in the workplace and contribute to any risk and hazard assessments. They must seek appropriate medical attention if needed and report any absence of or defect in any equipment or protective device to the employer or supervisor. And they must make sure they use or wear the required equipment, protective devices, or clothing that the employer requires them to wear. You also have your health and safety rep and joint health and safety committees. So what we have here is a quick breakdown of when a health and safety rep or a committee is required. If a workplace has between 1 and 5 employees, there is no health and safety rep or committee required. If a workplace has between 16 and 19 employees, they are required to have a health and safety rep. However, if there is a designated substance within the workplace, a joint health and safety committee is required. For 20 to 49 employees, you are required to have a health and safety committee. There must be 2 certified members of this committee. One must represent management and one must represent the workers and must not have any managerial function. The whole point of having this even distribution of workers and management is to ensure that workers have a voice when it comes to health and safety. If you have 50 plus employees, then you are required to have a joint health and safety committee, and there must be 4 members of this committee. There must be at least 2 out of the 4 must be workers, and 1 to 2 must be management members. The whole point is to make sure you either have an even amount or more workers on the committee than management. Management is there to basically share management input and approve costs and things of the such. Workers are there and they are the ones that are out checking on health and safety in the workplace. There must still be 2 certified members, and again, it must be 1 worker and 1 management member. A health and safety representative's responsibilities include investigating all critical injuries related to workplace accidents. They must receive a report of critical injury within 48 hours of the occurrence. They must receive written notice within 4 days for any non-critical injury. They must investigate work refusals and accompany a Ministry of Labor inspector during investigations. They must also identify workplace hazards, carry out regular monthly inspections of the workplace, and make recommendations to the employer on how to improve health and safety. They must be available to receive worker concerns, complaints, and recommendations, and be available to discuss problems and recommend solutions. They must be available to provide input into existing and proposed health and safety programs and be consulted about workplace testing, as well as receiving the results of that testing. A joint health and safety committee is very similar to the responsibilities for a health and safety rep. However, there are a couple of small differences. The Joint Health and Safety Committee is required to identify workplace hazards and be consulted about workplace testing. They will make recommendations to the employer on how to improve health and safety. They must investigate work refusals and serious accidents and carry out regular monthly inspections of the workplace. They must be available to receive worker concerns, complaints, and recommendations, and they will also meet at a regular frequency to discuss health and safety requirements. They must be available to discuss problems and recommend solutions, and be available to provide input into existing and proposed health and safety programs. A joint health and safety committee member will also accompany a Ministry of Labor inspector during their investigation or their visit. And they will also be informed of any work-related accidents involving injury, death, or occupational illness, and receive the results of any reports relating to health and safety in the workplace. So before I move on into the Ministry of Labor section, I also wanted to make sure that it was clear that the employer and the supervisor have significant responsibilities with regards to health and safety. They also have significant liability. So an employer and a supervisor must ensure they do everything reasonable to protect the health and safety of the workers. In the event of an accident or if there's charges laid, this is the only defense that a supervisor or employer has under the health and safety laws and criminal code, is that they've done everything reasonable to protect those workers. So let's talk about the Ministry of Labor. So the role of the Ministry of Labor inspectors is to enforce the sections and clauses of the Act and regulations. They will issue orders for non-compliance, stop the work if it's performed unsafe, and they'll also seize any documents and items, but also provide you with written notification that they're doing so. Under the Health and Safety Act, Section 54 details the inspector's powers. So I have summarized those. The powers of the Ministry of Labor inspectors include entering the workplace at any time without warrant or notice, requesting the use of any machine, device, article, thing, material or biological, chemical, or physical agent or part thereof, require drawings, specifications, license, document, record or report to inspect, examine, and copy. Remove the above with written notification to make copies and return to the workplace. They also conduct and take tests and collect samples of any equipment, machine, device, article, thing, material, or biological, chemical, or physical agent. And they also will require training materials to inspect, examine, and copy materials or attend any such training program. They're also allowed to require in writing an employer to conduct any tests and reports by a professional at the employer's expense. They can request any person, professional, to accompany or assist them with any inspection, test, or inquiry as they see fit. They can speak with any worker or person in the workplace they deem relevant to their inspection, inquiry, or test as they see fit, and then you are not permitted to prevent them from speaking to that person. They can require the workplace or part thereof not to be disturbed for a reasonable period of time to carry out an examination, investigation, or test. And finally, they can require any equipment, machine, device, article, thing, or process to be operated or set in motion, or a system or procedure to be carried out that's relevant to their examination, inquiry, or test. They can also require an owner, constructor, or employer to provide a report bearing the seal and signature of a professional engineer at the workplace's expense, stating that load limits of a building, structure, or any part thereof, or any other part of a workplace, whether temporary or permanent, a building, structure, or any part thereof, or any other part of a workplace, whether temporary or permanent, that it is capable of supporting or withstanding the loads being applied to it or likely applied to it. And finally, a building, structure, or any part thereof, or any part of the workplace, whether temporary or permanent, is capable of supporting any loads that may be applied to it. They can also require in writing to produce records or information or provide a report or evaluation made by a professional of any process or biological, chemical, or physical agent present, used, or intended for use in a workplace, and the manner of use at the expense of the person, including the ingredients and common names, composition and properties thereof, toxicological effects, the effect of exposure thereto, whether by contact, inhalation, or ingestion, protective measures used or to be used, emergency procedures and measures used or to be used to deal with the exposure, and the effective use, transport, and disposal of that chemical, biological, or physical agent. Well, that's a fair amount of information we've gone over so far. Let's talk about more what an employer needs to do to help prevent any sort of liability or issues in the workplace. So the first things first is the health and safety policy. So the Health and Safety Act places many duties on employers. One of the duties is to have a written health and safety policy and program. Section 25(2)J of the Act requires the employers with more than 5 employees to prepare a policy, prepare procedures, review the program, and sign the policy at least once a year, and set up a program to implement that policy. The health and safety policy should be a straightforward statement of senior management's commitment to workplace safety and health. It should be broad enough to cover all aspects of the company's activities. From your health and safety policy, you do need to develop a program to help support the health and safety policy. This can be done through policies and forms. Some of the areas that you should consider, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but just an idea to get you going, is you need to consider roles and responsibilities, training, inspections, incidents, PPE, and continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is your regular monitoring of your program, whether it's on an annual basis with reviewing it, or even during regular business activities, making sure that health and safety is being done in the workplace. You also need to consider some HR-related policies, such as violence and harassment, return to work, and progressive discipline. Ultimately, the employer is responsible for identifying and controlling hazards in the workplace. Supervisors and workers have a role in this identification and controlling of hazards in the workplace as well. Because of this, they need to make sure that they identify and control the hazards that are found in their workplace. The Joint Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety reps will identify hazards and recommend corrective actions, as well as follow up to ensure that the hazards have been addressed. So the easiest way to identify and control your hazards is to develop a hazard assessment. There's a few different ways that you can do this. You can observe and report. You can check previous records. You can conduct an inspection. You can also use what's called the RACE method, which is recognize, assess, control, and evaluate the controls. Factors that contribute to making a job hazardous are identified as people, equipment, materials, environment, and process. These are the 5 main categories that you'll find different types of hazards. People hazards and hazards that fall under the people category are the most difficult to control because they do involve human interaction. And as we all know, we cannot control what everybody does. When you're looking at controlling hazards and developing your control methods, you want to make sure the employer and supervisor assess the hazards and implement these controls. You want to look at 2 different ways. You want to look at your controls at the source, along the path, or at the worker. At the worker is usually your PPE. Along the path could be an administrative or engineering method, and at the source is usually eliminating or substituting. So you have your hierarchy of controls. Obviously, the best way to control a hazard is to eliminate it completely. This is not always going to be the case. You could also try to substitute. So if you're using a chemical, you could try and substitute with a less hazardous chemical. If that won't work, you can also try engineering controls. This could be ventilation, using certain chemicals outdoors, setting it up so that it doesn't get to the worker. Your administrative controls have more to do with scheduling, reducing the exposure, and finally, your PPE is your last line of defense. One of the things that employers like to do is they like to try and use PPE as the only control hazard that they put into place. They do need to look at the hierarchy, and they need to try and use multiple different control methods in addition to PPE in order to be able to control the hazard effectively. From your hazard assessment, you'll develop policies and procedures to address each hazard. So you must include and identify the hazards and control measures for different tasks and work processes. So some of these examples could be trips and falls, ergonomic hazards, the hazards involved with using machines and equipment, hazards involved with different tasks performed, such as lifting and carrying, environmental hazards. This could be noise, lighting, radiation. These are all different hazardous conditions that need to be addressed. And finally, your emergencies. So you need to make sure that you have proper emergency procedures in place. Your training, you need to make sure that your workers are trained. You need to provide them with information, instruction, and supervision on how to work safely. Some of the minimum training requirements include worker and supervisor health and safety awareness. This would be the worker 4-step and supervisor 5-step that's been released by the Ministry of Labor. Violence and harassment, training on the measures in the workplace that have to do with violence and harassment. WHMIS. WHMIS is mandatory for anyone who may come into contact with chemicals. People will always ask whether their employees need WHMIS because they're only working in an office. It's strongly recommended that everybody does WHMIS training. And then that way you don't have to explain to an inspector why your employees don't have to do WHMIS. First aid, CPR, and AED training are also required for the workplace. Health and safety reps, if there's a health and safety rep, they do require training. And your Joint Health and Safety Committee also requires training. This includes certified members and non-certified members as well. And you also need to make sure you train your workers on the company-specific hazards and procedures. So if you've developed your hazard assessment, you need to train the workers on the control measures that you've put into place. Your company information, hazards and concerns, hazard assessments, and regulations applicable to the workplace may also require additional training. This could have to do with things such as respirators and mask fit, working at heights, the use of any equipment such as forklifts or even scissor lifts or boom trucks. This all requires additional training in order to comply with the regulations. You must make sure that you investigate all accidents and near misses in the workplace. And you need to make sure you report lost time, healthcare, or modified work accidents to the WSIB within 3 days. Any copies of non-critical accident information must be provided to your health and safety rep and committee or committee. You need to make sure that your incidents and accidents, regardless of if they are an accident or a near miss, are documented. And you need to keep documentation on file, regardless of whether you have to report to WSIB or the Ministry of Labor. You must make sure that you conduct inspections of the workplace on a monthly basis. Your supervisor should be completing these inspections, and your health and safety rep and Joint Health and Safety Committee member is also required by law to conduct an inspection once a month. There are some cases where more frequent inspections are required. This has to do mostly with equipment and machines, where a daily inspection is the bare minimum. You need to document any hazards that are found, and you need to have follow-up to ensure the hazards are corrected. So because we're currently in COVID, I am also going to include a small COVID requirement. So the Ministry of Labor is out right now going into workplaces asking for the COVID-19 safety plan document. It is a document that they have provided a template for online. You can also develop your own COVID-19 safety plan. You don't have to use their template. But all workplaces are now required to develop measures to combat COVID-19 in the workplace and have this safety plan. Any failure to comply may result in a fine between $750 and up to $500,000 and up to a year in jail. And if it's not fixed, there could be an additional fine of up to $5,000 per day that it is not corrected. The safety plan contents are going to need to include your screening measures, both passive and active screening, your masks and face coverings and PPE, cleaning measures and sanitation, signage, physical distancing measures. So this could be within the workplace, reducing the number of workers on site. This could also be setting up curbside pickup and delivery, depending on your workplace. You also need to consider isolation measures. So what to do in the event of a case being reported. And also you need to ensure that you include training measures. So how you're going to train your workers. My strongest suggestion is, it is your choice, but I would strongly suggest using the ministry's template as a guideline. One, they are asking for that. So if you are providing it on that form, then at least they know that you are going to be reviewing and covering the required contents. And finally, you need to make sure that you evaluate the program. So putting a program together, putting your policies together, putting procedures, assessing hazards, and just having a binder with a bunch of policies in it, collecting dust is not good enough. You need to make sure that all your programs are reviewed at least on an annual basis, or if there's a change in the business process. The policies must be signed annually and posted on your safety boards. You must monitor progress with program compliance on a regular basis. So this can be done through inspection and worker observations. And finally, always make sure that you review and monitor the program regularly. The more you monitor, the better. I know it can be time constraints, but you do need to make sure that you keep an eye on health and safety in the workplace and make sure that your workers are following the processes you've put into place. So if you do get a visit from the Ministry of Labor, you need to make sure that if they issue you an order for non-compliance, that you comply with the order. So if that means you need to make a change, you need to make a change. You need to make sure that you correct all substandard acts that have been found. Never start work where a stop work order has been issued unless the Ministry of Labor inspector has removed the stop work order. And you must always make sure that any orders or documentation from the Ministry of Labor is provided to your health and safety rep and joint health and safety committee. This allows them to help you determine corrective actions that need to be taken. The ministry is going to require you to do it based on what's the minimum requirements of the law. So if you do something over and above, that certainly works out in your favor. But the minimum you need to do is comply with the order that they've issued in the way that they've issued it. If you have questions, you can ask them, but you do need to make sure you comply. So finally, one of the few places that you can get help, the Ministry of Labor has all kinds of resources on their websites, including the Health and Safety Associations. You can use those as a guideline, but I do caution you that if you are going to use something, make sure that you update it to your company. Printing off a page from their site and saying that that's your health and safety is not acceptable, and it will not be accepted. You can also use your health and safety reps and joint health and safety committees. They are valuable resources and they are trained on health and safety matters. And finally, you can enlist the services of a health and safety consultant, such as myself, who can come in and provide you with guidance on how to comply with certain health and safety issues and concerns that are raised. And so just to wrap up here, I just wanted to provide some contact information for myself, as well as Ray and Hartsap out in Cambridge. If you have any questions about any health and safety related matters, please feel free to reach out to either of us, and we would be more than happy to help you get to the point that you need to get to. You can also find us on social media and register for our newsletters, as we do provide valuable tips and information that you can use for your health and safety. Thank you very much. I think we have some questions. So the first question we have here is, do the number of employees depend on total or per location? Is that in regards to the Joint Health and Safety Committee requirements or the health and safety reps? When you're looking at your locations, if you have multiple locations and you have overall, you have 50 employees and you have them spread out over 4 locations, you will need a joint health and safety committee at that point, and it will actually be what's called a multi-workplace committee, where you'll have one representative from each location. Contractors. Okay. So my recommendation in that case would be, you need to look at the total of the entire workplace and determine how many people you have, and then use the guidelines for the committee requirement or the health and safety rep requirement. You are going to have a health and safety rep as you set up your committee anyway. There's going to be one person in each location, but technically you are going to have a committee that works over multiple locations. And then I guess the next question is, are contractors counted in the number of employees? So this is a difficult question. It really depends in a sense on who you talk to. If the contractor is strictly working for you, then they are counted as an employee. I know that there's ways that you can set it up where they are set up as a contractor, an independent contractor. However, the ministry will look at it as, if they aren't working for anybody else, then they will be classified as an employee. So, I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions? Okay. Okay. I believe there will be some feedback form that will be sent to you after the webinar. We will be sharing the presentation. We'll also be posting the video on YouTube as well, and Ray will have it posted on his website in the coming days for reference. Please feel free to provide any feedback. We are also looking for additional topics that we can run on. We do have a few that we're thinking about, but if there's anything that you'd like to hear discussed, we're more than happy to hold a webinar and basically discuss anything that you'd look for more information on. And as I said, again, if you have any questions about health and safety, please feel free to reach out to either of us. We'd be more than happy to assist you.